Today is December 11th, 2022, and my guest is author and economist Arnold Kling. Arnold has a very nice Substack account called In My Tribe. This is his 18th appearance on EconTalk. He was last year in October of 2021 talking about reforming government. Arnold, welcome back to EconTalk.
Thanks. I'm chasing Mike Munger, I think.
Yeah, we all are, by definition. You're definitely in the top 5. You might be 2 or 3. I don't know exactly where you are, but
Okay.
Mike might be untouchable. We'll see. Our topic for today is a number of recent developments in the tech world. I want to start with talking about Twitter. What are your thoughts on Elon Musk's acquisition and its significance in general for social media, that he's taken it appears more of a hands-off approach than Twitter had before he took over, in terms of what's allowed to be said and not said, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think that's, this issue of content moderation is a very interesting problem. I think it would be an interesting problem in the abstract, right? Because you can make 2 types of errors. You can allow content on that you really shouldn't, or you can ban stuff or downweight stuff that that you're wrongly banning or downweighting. I don't know how to avoid that dilemma, that you're going to make mistakes either way. What's weird about it at this point in history is it's being done in the context of there's at least one group of people who are just very determined to have certain content banned, and they think it ought to be banned. So the free speech culture has been on the decline, and has, the phrase free speech itself, which used to be, kind of automatically, a positive thing, a motherhood and apple pie thing, is being questioned really for the first time in my lifetime. So it's a weird time to try to be, try to deal with that the dilemma.
Do you think of this as a free speech issue? I mean, there are sort of 2 things that I think are important on Twitter that are, in the conversation. One is so-called hate speech, or let's just call it ugliness. And the second is medical opinions that some people thought shouldn't be promulgated. And in real freedom of speech, the government does not crack down on either of those. But on a private platform like Twitter, how do you think about that? Do you think of it as, it's a very unusual private platform, obviously?
Yeah, well, I think the latest revelations are portrayed as showing pretty close to collusion between government and Twitter, and that that I think brings the whole free speech issue right back into play. As far as a private entity, I don't know. It's a great attempt by libertarians to create a distinction, but nowadays, I mean, let's say, are universities private entities? I mean, if they're getting government funding, so I don't know that we can. I think in terms of a free speech culture, that people have to believe that the mere expression of opinion is not a threat, it's not violence, and the term hate speech is something that I don't think should be thrown around very much, if at all. So, I'm one of these people we're both Jewish. If somebody wants to deny the Holocaust, go ahead. In my view, the right answer isn't to ban them from saying it. It's to present evidence that reasonable people would agree supports the view that you shouldn't deny the Holocaust.
I mean, I agree with that. I think that what's interesting to me is that Musk sees this, at least he says so. Who knows what he really thinks? But in his tweets, he seems to see freedom of speech as an important value for Twitter. My view used to be, like you said, as a libertarian, well, it's different. It's a private platform. It's not a government project. They can do whatever they want. They can ban people we could have a left-wing Twitter and a right-wing Twitter and some other kind of Twitter. The challenge, of course, is that there's really only one Twitter. And it's very hard to have a second or third Twitter.
As people on the left are discovering, right? They were hoping they could leave Musk in the dust, and that's just not so easy to do.
Doesn't seem to be happening. Yeah, do you have any forecasts on what's going to happen? I mean, what I found entertaining is that in the first days of Musk's tenure, he proposed this $8 blue check, and was met with a firestorm of both criticism and disdain that this could possibly be a good idea. It was obviously a mistake. And this view was propagated on Twitter without any knowledge of what it was actually going to be, right? There was it wasn't clear what the actual program he had in mind was. But people were so sure that he was an idiot. And I've mentioned this before. I foolishly said I thought he has some skin in the game. $44 billion would seem to encourage him to think carefully about what he does. And of course, if it turns out to be a mistake, he can change it, which he appears to have done. But I think it's too early to tell. But he's free to do whatever he wants. He owns it. Yeah. And the question is whether, is that good or bad, given that we now have these silos of social media owned by powerful, somewhat intriguing entrepreneurs, right? It's a very interesting time, but I don't think we have a very clear way to think about it.
Yeah, I feel more on solid ground myself when I talk about sort of the economics of trying to support social media. So if you want to switch over to that, I'd be happy to.
And you had a post on your Substack where you gave Elon some free advice. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, a problem that's been very acute in the internet, but actually precedes it, is a problem that a lot of things that you want to sell don't have the standard economic textbook. It's called a U-shaped average cost curve, where you produce output up to a certain quantity and the average cost is declining, and then you get beyond that point and average cost is increasing. And so the solution to that, in most cases, the optimum is to set price equal to marginal cost.
And define that, Arnold. What's marginal cost?
It's the cost of the next unit of producing the next unit. So,
and in that U-shaped example, the cost of the next unit might be rising because you have to produce more and more. You're going to have to draw resources into your firm that are more and more expensive, as you have to. Let's say you need more land for some agricultural aspect or some project, and the land that's available is scarcer and more valuable than the early land that you used, and therefore it's going to get more and more expensive to expand. And so prices are going to have to rise as the business gets bigger.
Yeah, as somebody once put it, you can't grow all the world's wheat in a single teapot. And, so if you have to, like you say, if you have to expand land, at some point the cost of growing wheat is going to be increasing. The other type of good has it's often called a natural monopoly. It has a very high fixed cost and low marginal cost. So a classic pre-internet example would be a pharmaceutical, where let's say you can produce a pill for pennies, but the fixed cost of getting it developed and tested might be hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you price it at the marginal cost of pennies, you'll never recover the fixed cost. And that problem is very widespread on the internet because the cost of distribution is, approximately zero. Cost of copying is approximately zero. So you've got a lot of goods. Maybe the standard circumstance on the internet is for there to be high fixed cost and low marginal cost. And that's very much true of these social media outfits. In fact, it's even more extreme than that because in some sense, the cost of an additional user is negative. You want to have more and more users if you're Facebook. You can't get away with charging a marginal cost of zero or negative and recover the high fixed cost of developing Facebook or Twitter.
And of course, those platforms have used advertising as their way of dealing with that, right?
So, right. And that's only one mechanism. So I go back to what I guess you could call a classic book, although something that comes out around 1999 or 2000. Can you call it classic? Information Rules by Hal Varian and Carl Shapiro, and they point out sort of all the ways that you can support something with high fixed cost, low marginal cost. Advertising is just one of them. The one that I find most interesting, and because you observe it in so many places, in fact, so many places that I have this catchphrase, price discrimination explains everything, that we observe price discrimination. And for something like Twitter, I think that's a very natural thing. So, he wanted to charge $8 for a month for the blue check. I would almost guarantee you that he can charge $8 a month for something because Twitter is a bundle of things, and it's very valuable to some people, and you can find some bundle of privileges that people will pay for. My initial guess was, having, let's say, more than 1,000 followers, plus the ability to direct message people. There's some bundle of rights and privileges that people would pay more for, and yet you still can keep the casual user on because you want to do that. Their marginal cost of keeping them on is zero or even negative. You want them on. So you want to keep the casual user and charge something to the user who has what we call inelastic demand. That is, they're going to be willing to pay. And so you want to charge more for the people who are willing to pay. And I'm confident that if they were to experiment and keep trying, they could find a way to price discriminate and make the service profitable.
Well, you can't be sure of the profitability, but you certainly get more revenue maybe than they're getting now. He fired a bunch of people, I think.
Yeah.
As far as we know. And I thought it was a little strange. People said, Twitter still works. So obviously they were doing nothing. I don't think that follows.
Yeah. My understanding is that the advertising model on Twitter is, unlike something like Google AdWords, where, it's a turnkey thing. You go onto Google, you say, I want to buy 1,000 impressions of the word, Arnold Kling or AP statistics or whatever might feel like buying the AdWords for. That on Twitter, because it's not a mass audience where you can easily identify your target, the ad campaign actually has to be designed professionally, really by the help of people from Twitter. So some of these people, and maybe they weren't fired or maybe they were involved in designing ad campaigns. And so they were revenue producers.
But I find everyone noted this before Elon Musk bought it, that the the role of advertising on Twitter is so ineffectual.
Yeah.
You know, I get the occasional promoted, is how it's described, post.
Tweet or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost never of interest to me. I never click through. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know whether
I've never liked the advertising model on the internet in general. I think there are better ways to try to support content, but somehow the advertising model became the standard thing. But I think my view is that Google gets X percent of advertising, Facebook gets Y percent, and everybody else collectively is fighting for 1 minus X minus Y percent, and that's not going to, you really shouldn't try to play that game. You should try to find some other revenue model.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what Musk does. I see glimmers throughout Twitter of innovation. I was struck by, and again, I'm not going to judge whether previous ex-employees were productive or not, but it was a pretty static platform. There wasn't a lot going on there. And I see more innovation in the months that Musk has owned it than before. So We'll see.
Okay.
Well, let's move on to FTX, another recent exciting event in the tech world.
Yeah.
The bizarre aftermath of the collapse of FTX has been Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder, doing the rounds of various. He did an interview with the New York Times. He did a late night email exchange with a reporter that was surprisingly honest.
Okay.
First, what happened, as best we know? What do you think happened there? What is FTX? What happened to it, as best we know?
Okay, as best we know, so let me take a little bit of a step back. So, everyone should understand that I have never been a crypto optimist, and one of my lines is that I think the worst thing that happened to crypto was the speculative boom in Bitcoin and other currencies, because that gives people the impression that the use case for crypto is wild speculation, and that's you don't want that to be your primary. There are other use cases that seem like there'd be more promising, more, that you'd want to build your reputation.
Sustainable.
Yeah. So, just to keep digressing a little bit, I think the interesting use cases are to get around badly managed financial systems / regulations. So if you're in Argentina and I'm your relative living in America, and I want to send money to you, Argentina might, if I do it above board, Argentina might set an artificial official exchange rate, let's say of 2 pesos to the dollar, when it really should be 5 pesos to the dollar, like in a free market. So if I send you a remittance and do it above board, I'm sacrificing, over half of the value by transacting at this artificial official exchange rate. So, in that case, Bitcoin becomes, keeping it, your remittance, outside of the view of the official government, but keeping it with something that can retain more of its value, that's a real use case. So remittances are a real use case. The other is if you have a banking system that just doesn't work. So I think the example that I've read supposedly of this is Vietnam, where you just, if you put your money in your bank, that's actually riskier than putting it in crypto. And that could either be because the banks are poorly regulated or because the government doesn't stop inflation or what have you. So that's kind of another use case. But, and this gets to my view of it, is that all these use cases are somewhat adjacent to criminal activity. That is, that you're getting out of the regulated world, out of the formal world, into the informal world, into the underground economy. So you're lying down with dogs, so to speak, and you're probably going to wake up with fleas. Maybe that's wrong. Anyway, that's.
But to get at the remittance.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish up.
No, you finished.
So we had a recent episode with Devin Zugel on the use of crypto in Venezuela, which is crazy. And then Mark Andreessen made this point that, crypto is important because for systems that don't have for countries that don't have good banking systems or reliable banking systems, it's important. But, and I think I've remarked on this program, my daughter is in London, and if I want to send her money, it's a remarkably expensive, and not easy to do. Expensive meaning there's a big chunk taken out by PayPal or whoever it is who's, they'll say they don't charge a fee, but then they get you on the exchange rate that they use.
Yeah, right.
Which I just despise. And the dream is that, crypto is this relatively frictionless digital currency transfer. But if my daughter can't do anything with it, it's not a very good system.
Yeah, I think, if the point is that if the financial system's working well, it will at some point figure out an efficient way to do, cross-border money transfers. There's incentive to do that. You can use computers. You don't have to use computers in the really complex, resource-intensive way that Bitcoin uses it. So anyway, back to FTX. If one of the challenges that crypto faces for its to do legitimate use cases like cross-border between the U.S. and the U.K. Is that it's not easy to learn how to use. There are all these stories about people losing track of their key so that they've effectively lost their crypto. I know people who say that they're very technically competent but cannot don't feel competent to actually own their own crypto. This reminds me of the state of the World Wide Web around 1994, when what was holding back mass adoption was that it was very hard for an individual to figure out how to get the internet protocols onto their computer. So the mass adoption problem tends to be solved, unfortunately, from my idealistic point of view, by large centralized entities. So, as the internet became hard to search, Google's kind of takes over. As people became interested in this social media phenomenon, Facebook takes over. The dream as of the early 1990s was that because the internet structurally was very decentralized, just in terms of the underlying technology, that the kind of social systems and economic systems that would be built on top of the internet would be equally decentralized, and we would all be in this kind of sort of libertarian utopia of a decentralized system. Well, that idealistic dream has come back with crypto, but my experience leads me to believe that you'll need these centralized entities to produce, that will be a necessary condition for mass adoption and for overall efficiency. So in crypto, what that means is third parties like exchanges become very important. And that's what kind of FTX was supposedly positioned as an exchange. And an exchange can make money either, it can make money by charging a fee, like you say. A bank can charge a fee for trading, dollars for pounds, and or it can make money on what's called a dealer spread, which is again, like charging you one exchange rate to go from dollars to pounds, and then a different exchange rate to go from pounds to dollars, so that it in effect makes a profit on both sides of the transaction. So that's how an exchange should work. But in the world of crypto, I guess these exchanges are holding your crypto. They're not just sort of instantly making a transaction between these two. Maybe they should. Maybe there are exchanges that do that they don't really hold on to it. But FTX was doing that. So in that sense, it's acting like a bank, right? I've got my, supposedly I've got my cryptocurrency being stored there, and I can take it out anytime I want. But when you're running a bank, there's always the possibility that you'll loot the bank doing whatever. In this case, he had like over 100 different entities that he was, the owner of or founder of. One of them being this Alameda firm. And as far as we can tell, he took a lot of people's money that they'd put into the FTX exchange and kind of did a a round trip trade with Alameda that somehow made both of them seem to have better balance sheets than they really had. And somewhere in this process, either Alameda or FTX caused a lot of this money to disappear, and sort of could be bad investments, maybe, things that, maybe consumption by Sam Bankman-Fried and his cronies. Who knows where the money went. It's mysterious how so much money could kind of disappear. I can't begin to tell you how it actually happened, and I'm not sure at this point anyone can.
I don't think we know at this point. As you said before we started recording, it could be fraud, it could be incompetence. The part that's entertaining about it is,
when you mentioned all his media tour, some of that could be that he's just addicted to that. He was he was superb at hyping himself in media terms. Or in some sense, he's preparing to plead insanity. Like, who would be crazy enough to give a media tour if people are suspecting you of fraud? So I can't, I must be crazy. So, go easy on me.
And just as an aside, he is, of course, the funder of a number of effective altruism projects. He is, on paper, at least in his public pronouncements, a utilitarian par excellence. And Eric Hole, past EconTalk guest, has written about that quite eloquently. We'll put some links up to his essays on this. I don't know whether...
I always hated that. I think months ago, the effective altruism stuff that he was pushing, I thought that was, that's committing the sin of believing that what's, how to fix the world. It's the same sin that a that a politician, an authoritarian politician commits, of saying, my central planning is superior to the market's trial and error. It's really the same thing. And I kind of called him out on that months ago, said, didn't like the guy for that reason.
And then in his interviews, he's hinted at the possibility that it was just a ruse to gain credibility. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, he does seem like a very disturbed individual, but somehow he's disturbed in such a way that he appeals personally to a lot of people. And the other, in addition to his personal quote unquote charisma, he threw a lot of money around to people in the media in order to get good publicity, including like supporting their publications, giving them, like a quarter of their funding or what have you. And you don't know to what extent he bribed individual journalists. The potential for conspiracy theories here, I think, is just huge. I mean, I think
Why? What do you mean?
Well, again, we don't know to what extent it was deliberate fraud. This guy, I think it's Mark Comodes, who called out FTX back in October, just said it's a bunch of interns running around trying to do an exchange. They have no more business. They shouldn't be running a lemonade stand, much less an exchange, was one of his lines. He thinks that one of the main attorneys for Bankman-Fried was really running the whole show, and so you get the picture that he was kind of using Bankman-Fried as this front man, while he could, where he was deliberately pulling off fraud. So there's all these potential conspiracy theories of the fact that he gave so much money to politicians, and then was invited to weigh in on regulation, and he's been invited to testify in front of Congress. Usually when somebody like that is invited to testify in front of Congress, it's the chance for the congressman to show up on TV, yelling at the guy. Who knows? Maybe these are all people he's paid for and he's going to be treated well. It's I think it's sort of I don't have a specific conspiracy theory, but I guarantee you they're going to be all, there are going to be a lot of plausible conspiracy theories coming out of this.
Well, I don't find it surprising that someone like Sam Bankman-Fried gets a lot of attention in the media. He's so outside the box. The media loves that. He's good. He makes for good copy. He appears to be sui generis, totally unique and unlike other people, and the rules of the game don't apply to him, and he's doing this pioneering thing. And Elon Musk has some of the same, charisma surrounding him. And these kind of people do generate an immense amount of media attention. We could mention Elizabeth Holmes, another example. She was somebody who... Go ahead.
Yeah, she's on the cover of lots of magazines and clearly charmed, Henry Kissinger and, other dignitaries. I think it was Kissinger was one of the people on her board. I hope I'm not maligning him.
So the part that you wrote about, which we haven't gotten to yet, that's all nice background. The part you wrote about, which I thought was fascinating, was the comparing Sam Bankman-Fried to Jeff Bezos and how your view of the two changed and what it tells us about the role of venture capital versus corporate innovation within a venture capital world, innovation within a corporate world.
Yeah. So, if you'd looked at the very start, I would have been equally skeptical of Jeff Bezos as an entrepreneur and Sam Bankman-Fried as an entrepreneur. As they start out, they're doing wildly ambitious things. They've got a lot of personal charisma, and you can't believe they know what they're doing. Like my line on Amazon is, as they were getting going is, okay, so what Walmart has to do to compete with Amazon is develop a website. What Amazon has to do to compete with Walmart is develop a whole logistics system for international shipping of goods and so on. So who's going to win? Well, it was clearly Walmart. And all they have to do is develop a website, and and that didn't turn out to be the case at all. So it turned out that Jeff Bezos had tremendous substantive skill. I think amazing substantive skill as a business leader. I mean, there are always people who will, denigrate anybody, but to me, he's like the most amazing business leader you could find. And Sam Bankman-Fried turned out to be a total fraud or a total incompetent, one or some combination of those two. And if you're a venture capitalist, it's probably hard to tell them apart at the beginning. Clearly there would be people who would, but what the ambition of a venture capitalist, once described it as, I'm not going for singles and doubles. What I want is not just even a home run, but a home run that goes outside the stadium and rolls down the street. For an ordinary investor like you or me, if we're going to put money into a particular stock, which we typically don't, typically buy index funds, but if we're going to do that, we'd say, well, I really want to avoid losing everything. The upside doesn't have to be unlimited. And with the venture capitalists, it's the other way around. Oh yeah, I lose everything on a lot of my investments, but every once in a while I hit the jackpot. And that kind of mentality means you want to back a founder who has, ridiculously high ambitions, and who has very grandiose visions. And so as they're starting out, Sam Bankman-Fried has a grandiose vision, or he promulgates one, and Jeff Bezos gives you a grandiose vision. And, which one, it seems like you should back both of them. And in fact, I think what a lot of venture capitalists feel is like they, if they've been around a long time, is, if they missed Amazon, that's the kind of error they don't want to make again. Whereas betting on Sam Bankman-Fried is like, okay, made that mistake, lost some money, happens all the time. So it's a very different perspective than what you and I would have looking at an individual investment.
It reminds me of Rory Sutherland's observation here on EconTalk when he said, I thought this was very profound. If you ask a person to hire 10 people, it's a very different phenomenon than asking 10 people to hire one within a corporation. So you have a corporation, right, and you ask 10 people to each recommend somebody. Well, they have to recommend somebody safe.
Yeah.
Can't take a chance. It's a high risk. It'd be foolish. But if you can hire 10 people, you might be happy to hire, you might be happy with that outcome, or 2 of them thrive and are spectacular hires, and 8 of them are just so-so or even mediocre or bad.
Yeah. So yeah, there's just a different incentive and a different kind of experience base that venture capitalists are dealing with. So it's.
But your point, which is not unrelated. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's susceptible to a charismatic goofball in a way that the rest of us wouldn't be.
But your other insight is that within a corporation, there's a vetocracy, a power of veto that plays a role. Explain that.
Basically, if you're in middle management and you propose some, very potentially spectacular project for your company, you're going to have to sit in meetings, and there are going to be 10 people in the room, and if one of them says this won't fly, that's it, you're done. And that's actually rational from the corporation's point of view, because as a middle manager, you have very little skin in the game. Suppose your project's going to cost $20 million. The upside is, $500 million or $1 billion worth of value. You're not going to get very much of that upside. On the other hand, if the corporation loses the 20 million, you're going to lose zero of the downside. So you don't have much skin in the game when you're playing with the corporation's money. And so a corporation that doesn't set up a bureaucracy that's skeptical of ideas that come from middle management is just going to end up throwing money at lots of projects that it can't, that don't turn out well, and just squanders its money. So a vetocracy, in short, is a rational thing to have. But that's why when innovations typically start out outside of big corporations, because it's just rational for them to not approve projects for people who don't really have that much skin in the game.
And as you point out, venture capital, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you just go. You need the upside, and you're right. And the founder does have a lot of skin in the game, typically.
Okay, let's move on to our last topic. It's about a week old, maybe 2 weeks at this point. It's a little bit new, maybe a little bit brash to talk about it, but that's ChatGPT. It's a project of OpenAI. OpenAI is a project. The CEO is Sam Altman, who is a past EconTalk guest when he was the head of the Y Combinator, which is an incubator for new ideas. A lot of people have been blown away by ChatGPT. I would think I'm one of those. Maybe you are less excited about it. But what it is a place where you enter a query or a comment or a question, and it talks back to you. It goes back to the oldest attempts to have AI help people. I'm feeling sad today. Oh, what are you sad about?
Yeah,
well, I'm having.
Yeah, that's Eliza, right? The artificial psychiatrist.
Right. So ChatGPT has that, but it also does some rather extraordinary things, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, I guess I think right now it's at the level of an undergraduate BS artist who hasn't studied enough for the test. Now, computer...
That gets you a long way, Arnold, in a lot of situations.
Right. So I think what's impressive, what strikes people is that it can sound like a human being, and you can even have it imitate a particular human being. Like if somebody has a lot of content out there, whether it's Shakespeare or Tyler Cowen or somebody, you say, write an essay about X in the style of Shakespeare or in the style of Tyler Cowen, it will imitate that. So it has a great facility with putting together words. It's a great BS artist. But a lot of stuff it does is BS. One of the first things I did, is I said, write an essay about Arnold Kling, Economist. And I proceeded to tell a bunch of lies. It said I was born in New York. I was actually born in St. Louis. It said I was born in 1960. It was actually 1954. So on. It said I wrote The Myth of the Rational Voter. That's written by Brian Kaplan. And it just said this with a straight face, like, it along with some things that were true about me. But it was just so. And somebody else described they had it asked for an essay on Thomas Hobbes. and it came back with, something that was a description of the philosophy of John Locke, which it attributed to Thomas Hobbes, even though Locke is, different in some ways, the opposite of Hobbes. So, so I get the sense, that it sort of looks for connections related to the words that you include in your prompt, and then its real skill is assembling them into a good sounding narrative, a narrative that sounds like what a human would put together. It may evolve into something different. There's this long essay by Gary Marcus, who's a real skeptic of the whole method of these sort of neural networks. So let me go back. This may be a weird thing, but when I was with Freddie Mac in about 1991, 92, 93, we were looking for ways to automate the underwriting process. We thought we could start to use computers to supplement or replace human underwriters. And the approach we first looked at was known as expert systems. And basically, you would program a computer with a bunch of rules that mimicked what a human underwriter would use. And then at one point, we heard a presentation on credit scoring, which was kind of an early version of big data, machine learning as we now do it, in that it just said, let's just look for correlations with default. And this wasn't even default on mortgages; it was just default on on credit cards and so on. And they found variables that statistically were important that human underwriters weren't even paying attention to. One was credit capacity. Like if you have, $30,000 of unused credit, that is, you've got some, credit cards with, let's say 3 credit cards each with a credit limit of $10,000, and you're not using any of them, that's a real strong sign that you're not going to default. Conversely, making a lot of inquiries, like if you've applied for 5 credit cards in the last 2 weeks, that's a real red flag. Well, human underwriters never even knew that. The computers figured it out. So, long story short, the statistical based or machine learning type, what we would now call machine learning approach to automating underwriting, won out, and the expert systems lost. And what's happened in AI, I think, has been something similar, but Gary Marcus claims that these sort of purely correlation-oriented, statistically oriented forms without any, domain knowledge entering the picture, we've reached their limit. That they're not going. His claim is they're not going to get a lot better, and you're going to have to, bring in other types of learning. And again, my experience would lead me to believe it's very hard to integrate them. Actually, it's very hard to integrate 2 different types of learning, 2 very different methods without one method hurting the other. Just like I think it's in chess, it's become very hard to integrate like a human's decision with the computer's decision. When the computers were first starting to get really good at chess, a human could spot a situation. Well, here's a situation where, based on the layout of the board, the computer's going to make a mistake, so I'm going to override it. But then you reach the point where the human override on average ends up worse than not overriding. Anyway, so it's very hard to integrate 2 methods of, 2 completely different methods of learning. And so we may have reached a point or come close to reaching a point where the ChatGPTs of the world don't get better.
That's a little early to tell.
It's way early to tell.
I'm
So you're more bullish than I am.
Well, I'm more impressed with it at its current level. A week and a half into it, I asked it something about Adam Smith, and it said, he wrote The Wealth of Nations, but you could also read Edwin Cannon's book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Cause of the Wealth of Nations, which is summarizes the ideas in Smith's book. Well, it doesn't. Cannon, I think, was the editor or whatever, but just a total blunder like you're talking about. At the same time, somebody sent me, I don't know, I think part of the fascinating part of this, you can't tell whether any of these things are legitimate or not. They appear to be written by a person. In fact, it appears to be like there's somebody, in a back room writing these who's really good at creating text. But somebody asked for me to opine or write about a sandwich. And it started talking about, among other things, all of which were pretty good, how a sandwich is an example of the division of labor and specialization, which is something I talked about in EconTalk, one of my favorite episodes, by the way, about Smith and Ricardo. We'll link to it. If you haven't heard it, please check it out. And I would also add, you should, since we're in the holiday season coming up, should think about EconTalk swag for your gift-giving needs. So we'll put a link up to the EconTalk swag store, which is at russroberts.info. We don't make any money on it. It just covers our costs, but it's a nice way for you to spread the word about EconTalk. But the part that impresses me, yes, it's going to make mistakes about who Arnold Kling is. It's not as reliable in many ways as Wikipedia or Google. But the part that's amazing about it is it's really good at writing in things where it's not having to think deep thoughts. The example I'll give you is I asked it to write an invitation to a party where I'm afraid the person won't come. It was a brilliant 3 or 4 paragraph invitation. I did a couple of those. I'm a pretty good email writer. I've helped a number of people, I'm sure you have too, where I've given them counsel on how to structure an email for a job interview or for an awkward situation. This kind of puts that kind of skill out of business, and it's a week old or 2 weeks old.
Yeah.
So I think, and the obvious example that people are worried about are written assignments and the inability to distinguish plagiarism. That might be good for education, by the way. Maybe we'll have fewer assignments that ask people to write up stuff they can find on the internet.
Yeah. No, I think the impact of the most immediate impact I can see is that it will create a big issue of deception and detecting deception in terms of, first of all, content, like, the biography of me that it put together immediately raises the issue of, you'd have to look through it to find out what's true and what's not. And then the issue of, deception, self-deception of, is this who it says it is, right? So if it gets really good at imitating Russ Roberts, could there be 100 Russ Roberts tweets out there that, and only one of them really comes from you? The ability to deceive other people about, or deceive people about who you are as a bot. And naturally, the response is going to be to develop a bot that can tell the difference between a bot and a human. So you've got this arms race going. You've got on the one hand, the bot is trying to, surpass the Turing test and sort of convince you that it's a particular person. And on the other hand, you've got a bot that's trying to distinguish between the two because, the human effort involved in determining the difference between a bot and a human is too difficult. I mean, that's, I think, why Elon Musk's $8 to get the blue check didn't work. It probably costs more than $8 a person to verify that that the person is who they say they are. So that all of a sudden we're going to have this arms race over something that wasn't so much of an issue before, of phony identity, either phony identity as a human or phony identity as a particular human. So people trying to achieve that, or computers trying to achieve that, the ability to mimic a particular human being, versus how do you detect and stop that? And the only way you can do that at scale is with another bot. So that's just a whole new arms race that I think is going to be the most immediate impact of these open AI projects.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that it used to be that you would see these outputs of these programs and you just laugh at them. There'd be a grammatical error, there'd be a goofy thing. Now, occasionally there'll be some like your example of getting your birth year wrong, or where you were born, or misunderstanding something about you. But for these sort of text writing applications like invitations, emails, short paragraphs, introductions, I don't think you'd be able to distinguish them between a human being and a bot. I get the most primitive version of this is already in email, right? In Gmail, when I want to reply to someone, it gives me a couple suggestions. Yeah. Thanks. Great job. Awesome. Right? It's one word.
Works for me.
Works for me. Yeah. And this is a whole new level. And I don't notice when someone responds to me, works for me, that I don't go, oh, I bet that was an Amazon. I bet that was a Gmail response. I just go, okay, it works for him. And I move on. And it's fine. Yeah. Nothing's at stake there. There's nothing wrong with getting that kind of help. There's nothing disturbing about it. If it was in French, you'd say, well, I'm surprised he speaks French. I didn't know that. But these are just the daily things that go on. And I think that piece of it is greatly, could be greatly life enhancing. Somebody mentioned to me, I read it on, I forget where I read it, but, somebody whose English was imperfect, they were trying to reply to a bunch of job interview questions or job interview requests, and they didn't know how to phrase the emails in English to sound normal. And this helped them. And it gave them access to things they wouldn't otherwise have gotten. Is that cheating? Yes, sort of. Is it a bad thing? I think it's probably a good thing. I don't know.
Well, it depends, if on the job they're going to need to, talk fluently in English with people, it's probably a bad thing. No, I mean, that's going to be it. There are going to be use cases where it's okay and use cases where it's terrible. And being able to separate the two is going to be really hard. No, but I do agree with you. It's an amazing development. It's amazing how fast it is. The other week ago, I was in Austin and met this kid who probably started shaving 6 months ago and says, I'm really into machine learning. I said, well, I wish I could buy shares in the guy. I mean, it's clearly going to be the big trend for a while. And like one anecdote is there was somebody who found a 16-question IQ test, and they gave it to the ChatGPT, and he said it scored about as much as a human who has an IQ of 100. And if computers, my experience with computers is once they reach a certain point and they're on the up curve, it's not like they stop. So will it take less than 6 months for the thing to come back with an IQ of 130? Probably. So it's watch this space. I'm sure I've said at least one thing discussing it that's going to look idiotic a few months from now.
My guest today has been Arnold Kling. Arnold, thanks for being part of EconTalk.
Okay, thanks.
This is EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. For more EconTalk, go to econtalk.org, where you can also comment on today's podcast and find links and readings related to today's conversation. The sound engineer for EconTalk is Rich Goyette. I'm your host, Russ Roberts. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on Monday.